Okay. Can everyone hear me? Welcome, everyone. For those people who are still looking for seats, there are a couple kind of up towards the front if you want to find them. My name is Kathleen Howe. I'm the director of the Pomona College Museum of Art, and it's a real pleasure to welcome you to this performance of the Guerrilla Girls. It's offered, yay, Guerrilla Girls. Okay. It's offered in conjunction with the exhibition now up in the museum, Art in Action, the Guerrilla Girls. And before I introduce the curator of that exhibition, Ben Feldman, to introduce the Guerrilla Girls, I just want to take a second to thank the co-sponsors of this event, which are the Pomona College Department of Art History, the Claremont Graduate University Art Department, and the Pomona College Women's Union. So thank you for helping us with this project. Hey. And although they aren't here now, I do want to thank two of the museum angels who make this kind of programming possible. First, Janet Inskeep-Benton, who has endowed a fund for museum programs that allow us to do projects like this. And then Josephine, or Dodie Bump, who has endowed a museum internship that allowed us to have Ben, as an intern, put together the Guerrilla Girls show. So thank you to them. But let me introduce Ben Feldman. Ben is an art history major, graduating senior. He is the curator of this exhibition, and I will have him introduce the Guerrilla Girls. Ben Feldman.
Thank you. So I'd like to start off just saying a few words about the Guerrilla Girls for those of you who don't know their longevity and the history. The Guerrilla Girls are an anonymous activist collective of female artists who banded together in New York City in 1985, evolving out of the age of 1970s feminism that established a platform for a new voice of feminist activists. The Guerrilla Girls created an innovative visual language consisting of textual and graphic design, which they utilized to address social issues. As agents of their own distribution, the Guerrilla Girls took to the streets to broadcast their ideas to the public on a mass scale. Combining humor and mockery, their early posters point out the lack of representation of women artists and artists of color in museums and galleries. While the Guerrilla Girls' central emphasis remained focused on the fight for artistic diversity and equal representation within an exclusionary art system, over the years, their social commentary expanded to encompass issues such as war, homelessness, eating disorders, and even labor discrimination. The members of the Guerrilla Girls wear gorilla masks in public and take the names of famous deceased women artists. The group's anonymity keeps the public attention on the issues they confront and not the personalities of individual members. By the 1990s, the Guerrilla Girls, fighting discrimination of all kinds, were transmitting their message through billboards, bus ads, magazine spreads, protest actions, and much more. The collective has also published a series of books, including the Guerrilla Girls' Bedside Companion to the History of Western Art, which represents a humorous, feminist outlook on art history. 30 years after their first actions, the Guerrilla Girls remain influential as educators and artists. While they continue to produce their own work inspired by today's issues, members make frequent appearances around the world, giving lectures and holding workshops on how to construct effective political graphics and provoke social dialogue. So without further ado, I'm honored to introduce to everyone here at the Claremont Colleges, Katja Kolwitz and Shio Uno.
very good about our image is that when you look at our masks, you think of what we stand for. And we stand for the conscience of the art world. And we feel that there is underrepresentation of women and minorities. And when you see our logo, basically, when you see our face, that's what we stand for, and it's not personal.
Women artists have never gotten the serious attention, and certainly not the serious money that male artists do. Why? The Guerrilla Girls, who call themselves the conscience of the art world, have plastered their answer all over town.
Coming into the city right now, probably 65% of the young artists are females, and yet less than 10% have their work shown. And that's one of the reasons I'm a Guerrilla Girl.
We believe that getting into a gallery or being shown in a museum even is for an artist an employment situation. The question was, how are we going to get women artists recognized when names, lives committed to art was completely ignored by the art history books? And so some of what we did was just attention getting. Do-gooders like Robin Hood, Batman, Zorro, and the Lone Ranger.
Most of the women who are doing all the bitching are completely talentless. For example, with the top women artists, you don't hear them making these embarrassing feminist pleas. I mean, it's just that these women are, they don't have any talent and they're taking it out on men.
Everybody who attended the Museum of Modern Art this year went up to the information desk and said, gee, where are the women artists? They put them on the walls.
That I'll probably kill a few of you. So who wants to try? Oh, you're playing it safe, that's good.
Like a banana?
Okay.
Who wants the
really?
cat?
Woo.
Oh, good catch.
I'm always happy when I just hand them to someone because I can't hurt them. Okay, you asked for it. There you go. Oh, we're running out. You have to get your own feminist bananas.
One more.
Killed a lot of people.
There is a good principle that created order, light, and man, and an evil principle that created chaos, darkness, and women. Pythagoras, 6th century BC.
Girls begin to talk and stand on their feet sooner than boys because weeds grow more quickly than good crops. Martin Luther, 1533.
I consider women writers, lawyers, and politicians as monsters and nothing but five-legged calves. The woman artist is merely ridiculous, but I am in favor of the female singer and dancer, Auguste Renoir.
Dear group of communists, you're the strongest bunch of bitches ganged together ever seen in world of art. Don't think of career you will make at 80. Best work of art a woman can make is in bed, making well love and maybe procreate non-idiot females. Feminism is reason for high number of AIDS casuistics in USA. Thank to you, bitch feminists, if weakest men become gay and AIDS raise up. A woman can be genius. Do you remember the Holy Virgin, you damn bunch of whores? Answer me if you have the courage, bunch of bitches. A letter to the Guerrilla Girls from an Italian art critic.
My dearest guerrillas, I'm in my senior year at the Willem de Kooning Art Academy in Holland. I'm glad you girls exist. This year, I'm the only female in my class who won't be making art of myself naked in order to graduate. It's really frustrating to have my work criticized by male professors for missing that naughty factor. Signed, Grr.
So let's see if this is working. Yes. So I'm Kata Kolwitz, and this is Chio Uno. I'm a founding member of the Guerrilla Girls, and Chio is almost a 2-decade member of the Guerrilla Girls. And it's great to be here in Pomona. We were just thinking it over, and we think this might be the first museum in Southern California where we've had an exhibition of our work.
So in 1985, we got the idea to put up 2 posters on the streets of New York about the state of women artists in the New York art world. It wasn't a pretty picture, but we had a new idea about how to construct political art, to twist an issue around and present it in a way that hadn't been seen before. The Guerrilla Girls were born, an anonymous bunch of women artists who wear gorilla masks in public and take the names of dead women artists as pseudonyms. Over 55 women have been members of the Guerrilla Girls, some for a week, some for decades.
Who knew that our work would cause all hell to break loose? Who knew it would cause a major crisis of conscience about diversity in the art world, a subject museums, collectors, and critics had ignored for a long, long time? Now it's a no-brainer. You can't tell the story of a culture without all the voices in it.
But there's still a ton of bias and corruption in the art world, and because artists are caught up in the economy of it all, it's hard for them to admit it openly. That's why these masks are still so necessary.
And who knew that our first posters would lead to hundreds of others, plus street actions, billboards, stickers, and books, not just about art, but about women and people of color in the world of film, politics, pop culture. Who knew that 30 years later, we, the agitating outsiders, would wind up inside the museums we criticize, with exhibitions at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, Tate Modern London, where a room of our posters is on permanent display, and the Reina Sofia in Madrid, etc.
Who knew we'd do large-scale street projects in cities like Rotterdam, Mexico City, Istanbul, Athens, and Shanghai? A year and a half ago, a major retrospective of our work was held in Bilbao, Spain, and it just opened in Madrid last week. There are 82 posters in the show with video and 13 tables containing over 200 smaller projects, letters, and ephemera, and a new street project in Spanish and Basque. Here's the street banner advertising the show. It says, "Why are the Guerrilla Girls talking trash about art, film, politics, and pop culture? Come in and find out." Here's a shot of the opening last week in Madrid.
You know, we've been so lucky to do this work, and we're so grateful to the thousands of people age 8 to 80 who write us each year telling us we inspired them to do their own crazy, creative kind of activism.
The Guerrilla Girls started out sneaking around in the middle of the night, putting up posters all over New York. posters that revealed the truth about the status of women artists in the New York art world. Here's one of our posters on a mailbox. By the way, affixing a poster to a US mailbox is a federal offense.
So we did it because we were really pissed off, but the posters caught everyone's attention and really started people talking about the issues. And this is an example of how bad things were. You notice we weren't saying there needed to be 50% this, we weren't complaining there aren't 13% this, 50% this. These were the numbers, 0, 0, 1, 0.
But soon the word on the street was that the Guerrilla Girls are a bunch of whining complainers. So negative. So we took this criticism to heart and decided to do a poster to help women artists be more positive about their situation. The advantages of being a woman artist.
Like working without the pressure of success.
Not being stuck in a tenured teaching position.
Being included in revised versions of art history.
Not having to undergo the embarrassment of being considered a genius.
And getting your picture in the art magazines wearing a gorilla suit.
This poster has been translated into many languages, and hardly a week goes by when we don't get letters from women in fields as diverse as mortuary science, veterinary science, music, physics, etc., telling us that this poster is the story of their lives too.
So a few years later, we were invited to do a billboard in Manhattan, and we saw it as an opportunity to try out this crazy voice we had developed on a much wider audience. So we went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art to conduct what we affectionately came to call the weenie count.
We counted naked males versus naked females in the artworks. When we went through the classical art section, most of the naked figures were male. When we toured the early Christian sections, there wasn't any flesh at all. In the Renaissance and Baroque paintings, the only fully frontal naked figure we could find belonged to the baby Jesus. It was only when we arrived in the 19th and 20th century, the modern era, when sex replaced religion as the major preoccupation of European artists, that we found our statistics. Do women have to be naked to get into the Met Museum? Less than 5% of the artists are women, but 85% of the nudes are female.
Now, we like to think our work has made a big difference in the art world, but let's face it, old habits die hard, and some museums are still lagging behind. So every so often we go back to the Met and count again, and for our latest count a couple of years ago, we're always sure things would be better, but this is what we found.
Fewer women artists, but more naked males. Is this progress?
In the mid-90s, the buzzword in the art world was multiculturalism. Art institutions were playing catch-up with women and artists of color, but instead of showing the great diversity of artists that there were, most museums were showing the same few artists over and over.
So we decided to do a campaign about tokenism, asking the question, is tokenism a solution or a continuation of the problem of exclusion? Top 10 signs you're an art world token. Every one of these things has happened to members of our group.
Like your busiest months are February Black History Month, March Women's History Month, April Asian American Awareness, June Stonewall Anniversary, and September Latino Heritage.
At parties and openings, the only other people of color are serving the drinks.
Whenever you open your mouth, it's assumed that you speak for your people, not just yourself.
Everyone is always telling you their interracial and gay sexual fantasies.
And a museum that won't exhibit your work gives you a prominent place in its lecture series.
Recently, the Guerrilla Girls have been busier than ever, and we're faced with a huge dilemma. What do you do when the system you've spent your life attacking embraces you? In 2005, we were asked to do a large-scale installation at the Venice Biennale. Since then, our work has been seen at major museums all over the world.
So what's a girl activist to do? We agonized over this, but for now, we just felt we had to make the decision to participate in exhibitions and appearances at museums because we've always wanted to get our message out to as large an audience as possible. And also, it's a thrill to criticize an institution right on its own walls.
Here's what we did in Venice, an installation of 6 17-foot-high posters that were the first thing viewers saw in the main exhibition hall of the Arsenale.
In one, we took on the Biennale itself, documenting 110 years of discrimination. But we also declared it the first feminist Biennale. Why? Because it had the first women directors ever, and surprise, the highest number of women artists ever.
We also took on the museums of Venice. We discovered that every historical museum in Venice, except one, has work by women in their collection, but almost all of it is kept in the basement, not on the walls. We appropriated the iconic image of Marcello Mastroianni straddling Anita Ekberg from the famous Fellini film La Dolce Vita.
And we asked the question, where are the women of Venice? The answer, underneath the men. Then we demanded that viewers go to the museums and say they want more women on top.
When the Washington Post newspaper gave us a full page as part of a special section on feminism and art, we designed our own tabloid, Not Okay. The Guerrilla Girls scandal rag to reveal the shocking truth about the low number of women and artists of color in the U.S. National Art Museums. Horror on the National Mall. Thousands of women locked in basements of D.C. museums.
Now, we even got the Post to buy us a picture of Brangelina. I don't know if you can see it kind of on the end sides, because as you all know, no tabloid is complete without them. But our caption under their picture said, "Celebrities say museums must adopt new policies." We got all our statistics from the museums themselves or from their websites, but when the Post called to fact-check our poster, the museums went bananas. The National Gallery hurriedly installed a sculpture by an artist of color, and the Hirshhorn suddenly found work by women and artists of color it never even knew it had.
By the way, here's how bad things were at our taxpayer-supported museums. National Gallery of Art, 98% male, 99.9% white. They only had one work by an African American in the entire museum.
You know, lots of museums and all kinds of buildings have the names of dead white males, geniuses, inscribed on their facades. And we've always wondered, maybe this is part of the problem. So we came up with a surgical solution for the Art Institute of Chicago.
Guerrilla Girls to museums, time for gender reassignment. At the time, the AIC modern galleries were 90% male, the contemporary galleries were 82% male, and there was only one work by an African American woman on display anywhere in the museum.
And now, now that we've done this poster version, we're really anxious to do this for real on the actual facade of a building. And walking around campus today, we found one that we think would be totally perfect. So, our favorite curators and museum directors over here, call us.
We love art and artists, but let's face it, the art world and art market really suck. There are lots of people who care about art, but there are also lots of posers, snobs, and even criminals. The art market is pretty much unregulated. In fact, it has been described as the fourth largest black market in the world after drugs, guns, and diamonds.
So here's our version of the history of art museums from our book, The Guerrilla Girls Art Museum Activity Book.
A brief history of museums. It all began because rich people have always had a lot of stuff, so when they ran out of space in their palaces and churches, they needed somewhere to store it all. Bingo! They started art museums. In Europe, museums became part of the government and are run by bureaucrats and civil servants. In the US, most museums are funded and overseen by super rich art collectors, the 1% of the 1%.
Now, it doesn't take a genius to realize that this system is ripe for corruption. These billionaire collectors sit on the boards of directors of museums and influence what museums exhibit and collect. They get museums to purchase work by artists they already own, increasing the value of their personal collections. Capitalism at its finest.
Okay, let's take a short art quiz. Of the top 100 art auction sales, how many were women artists? 0.
What does art by famous women cost compared to famous guys?
The highest sale ever for a living woman artist, $7 million for Yayoi Kusama, is only 12% of the highest for a living male artist, $58.4 million for a Jeff Koons.
Okay, can you make money from a museum while you're on its board of trustees?
Answer, $11 million says yes. That's what Count Giuseppe Panza was paid for selling part of his art collection to the Museum of Contemporary Art in LA while he was on the board. He also sold other pieces from his collection to the Guggenheim that year for $30 million.
What's one of the economic forces behind the new Guggenheim Museum in Abu Dhabi?
Debt bondage. Foreign workers on the Guggenheim and in the surrounding luxury zone are hired from South Asia and flown to the Emirates. When they arrive, their passports are confiscated and their pay is nothing like what they were promised. They're stuck living under inhumane conditions and working for a pittance.
What's more important to the Metropolitan Museum than free speech?
Money. The Met recently accepted $65 million from the ultra-right-wing Koch brothers, who spend even more than that trying to undermine our election process. What did the Met do after getting the tainted money? They held a big party, then called in the cops to arrest a group of artists who protested outside by projecting this image onto the museum.
Outrageous fun facts about one museum trustee who went to jail and one who got away.
Fun fact number 1. In the late 1980s, A. Alfred Taubman, who made big bucks building shopping centers, sat on the board of the Whitney Museum of American Art, while he was also the chief stockholder of Sotheby's auction house. At the Whitney, he was privy to which artists the museums would be showing and acquiring, information that could have been very useful to his auction house. No one questioned the ethics of this at the time, but in 2002, the Fed sent him to the slammer for price fixing with the rival auction house, Christie's.
Fun fact number 2. Gary Winnick was the guy who dreamed up the company Global Crossing, manipulated its stock price, sold off his own holdings for $800 million, and then ran the company into the ground, wiping out the pension plans of all of his employees. Where is he now? Well, he sits on the board of directors of the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And we say to them, better keep this guy away from the finance committee.
Speaking of billionaires, here's a peek at a billboard and sticker campaign we're working on for New York City this spring.
Can you see it? Should we read it? I don't know.
Should I read it?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Dear art collector, art is so expensive, even for billionaires. We completely understand why you can't pay all your employees a living wage. Guerrilla Girls.
We're always trying to improve museums, and whenever we go into a museum store, we can't help but think of the products we'd like to see there.
Here's a baseball cap. Diversity in American museums, 60 years behind baseball.
An umbrella, Whitney Museum of American Art. None of our press. I guess I don't have to read it.
An art collective for a day kit. Here's everything you need to act like billionaire MoMA and Met trustee Leon Black. It includes a glittery party hat so you can have your own pretend birthday party in the Hamptons with $1 million live performance by Sir Elton John, just like Leon's 2011 bash. Hard times for everyone but the billionaires in the art market.
Okay, let's cut to an area of U.S. culture that's even worse than the art world. Just down the street from here, Hollywood. The film industry wants to think of itself as edgy and progressive and ahead of the curve. But if you look behind the scenes at writers, editors, directors, cinematographers, you find a pathetically low number of women and people of color.
So for several years, we've been renting billboards in Hollywood, just a few blocks away from where the Academy Awards are held. For our first one in 2002, we decided to put a little realism into the Academy Awards. We redesigned the Golden Boy to look more like the guys who take him home.
The anatomically correct Oscar. He's white and male, just like the guys who win. So we had to back up this crazy, outrageous statement with the facts, which at the time were, no woman has ever won Best Director, 94% of the writing awards have gone to men, and only 3% of the acting awards have gone to actors of color.
That was the very year both Denzel Washington and Halle Berry won Oscars for their performances, and we're convinced it was because of our billboard. A few years later, Monique, Octavia Spencer, and Lupita Nyong'o became the 5th, 6th, and 7th black women in 86 years to win an Oscar for acting. Jeffrey Fletcher and John Ridley became the first black men to win for screenwriting, and Catherine Bigelow became the first woman to win Best Director, and only the 4th ever nominated. And we take credit for that too.
And here's another one of our billboards about women directors. You know, Hollywood producers have come to us several times and they say, Guerrilla Girls, we want to make a film about the history of 1960s, 1970s feminism. And maybe you could help us. Do you have any ideas? And the minute we tell them our ideas, they usually run away and we never see them again. But one day we got to thinking, what if Hollywood did make a movie about the history of 1970s feminism? What would it be like? And the minute that thought flew into our heads, another thought flew right behind it, which was, maybe we're lucky Hollywood hasn't made that movie. So we decided to create the movie poster for the film we hope never gets made, The Hollywood Way.
A major Hollywood studio presents The Birth of Feminism. We cast our movie with 3 luscious babes, Pamela Anderson as feminist leader Gloria Steinem, Halle Berry as the great civil rights lawyer Flo Kennedy, and Catherine Zeta-Jones as Congresswoman Bella Abzug. Our tagline, they made women's rights look good, really good.
Now, those of you who have studied the feminist movement, which is probably all of you, and those of you who were part of the 70s feminist movement, which is many of you here today too, I think, I'm sure feel very gratified because you appreciate that we worked hard to make our poster historically accurate. Because I'm sure you learned in all your classes that the great leaders of the feminist movement did wear bikinis 90% of the time. To round out our credits for our film, we made it produced by Jerry Bruckheimer, screenplay by Joe Esterhaus, directed by Oliver Stone, and soundtrack album by Eminem.
And that brings us to the music business. Last spring, Pharrell Williams invited us to be in a show in Paris about women, and we did a few new projects for it, including this repurposed version of our best-known poster.
Do women have to be naked to get into music videos when 99% of the men are fully dressed? And to help prove our case, we appropriated an image from Robin Thicke and Pharrell's Blurred Lines.
Now for some pure politics. We've done lots of posters about politics and social issues.
You know, people always ask us, what are the Guerrilla Girls doing to help fight the war against terrorism? And we've decided that the world needs a new weapon to fight the dangers that we face. And here it is at Yoko Ono's Meltdown Festival in London in 2013.
The estrogen bomb. Drop it on the superpowers, and the guys in charge will throw down their big guns, hug each other, apologize, and start to work on human rights, education, healthcare, and an end to income inequality. Send estrogen pills to presidents, prime ministers, generals, oligarchs, and CEOs everywhere.
You know, an estrogen bomb was recently dropped on this guy. And as you all know, its name is Pussy Riot.
In 2009, we did a poster about hatred and violence against women that appeared on the streets of Montreal on the 20th anniversary of their worst mass murder ever, when a gunman, Mark Lapine, claiming he was fighting feminism and killed 14 women studying engineering at the École Polytechnique.
Our poster is a graffiti wall of hate speech through the ages. From Plato to Confucius, who said 100 women are not worth a single testicle, to Pat Robertson, who said feminism is a socialist, anti-family movement that encourages women to leave their husbands, kill their children, destroy capitalism, and become lesbians.
It struck us that it's still okay to publicly say things about women that wouldn't be tolerated if said about other groups. Case in point, US radio host Rush Limbaugh saying that college students who use birth control are prostitutes and sluts.
You know, the Guerrilla Girls take on all kinds of issues that we're passionate about. And we recently finished a new kind of little booklet thing about a topic that's really important to us, which is the female body and how it's been treated. So not a lot of people have seen it yet, but we're going to present it to you tonight. The hysterical herstory of hysteria and how it was cured from ancient times until now.
It also gives us the opportunity to sing about it. Still crazy after all these years. Sorry. Still crazy after all these years. Once upon a time, women in Europe and America suffered from a terrible disease called hysteria.
The symptoms were nervousness, fatigue, anxiety, insomnia, faintness, muscle spasms, shortness of breath, irritability, headaches, heaviness of the abdomen, fluid retention, lack of concentration, depression, loss of appetite for food or sex, ticklishness, and making trouble. Doctors claim that 2 out of every 3 women suffered from this terrible affliction.
No one knew what caused hysteria, but great men of science decided it must have something to do with women's mysterious sexual organs.
Something in the way she moves. In ancient Greece, Plato believed that the uterus wandered around a woman's body, choking and strangling other organs as it went.
No sympathy for the devil. In the Middle Ages, people thought women who showed extreme symptoms of hysteria were possessed by the devil. They were witches. Among the cures, burning at the stake and hanging.
Hit me with your best shot. In the Renaissance, special instruments were developed to purge women of hysteria. Dutch houses had a wooden syringe, like the thing on the top, at the outhouse, in their outhouses, which was hollow and shot medicinal fluids into a woman's vagina to flush out the unsavory stuff deep inside her, including old sperm.
In Italy, a device was used to fumigate women's innards with hot vapors.
Dr. Feelgood. Another treatment for hysteria, if a woman could afford it, involved a physician massaging the inside edges of a patient's vagina with aromatic oils.
If the procedure was successful, she would fall into a frenzied state of groaning and moaning, sometimes over and over again.
We're not making this stuff up, by the way. It was not unusual for a woman to lose consciousness or fall asleep. When revived, she was in a state of calm relaxation, cured until her next episode of hysteria.
Some women had the procedure as often as once a week. It was especially effective on virgins, widows, and nuns. Sometimes the treatments would take minutes, sometimes hours. What a lot of work for doctors.
Okay, Guerrilla Girls reality check. Let's see. Doctors gave women orgasms and got paid for it. Is that healthcare or is that prostitution?
Good, good, good vibrations. Good vibrations. After the electric motor was invented in the 19th century, doctors came up with exciting new ways to treat the ever-present problem of female hysteria. They used newfangled vibrating machines directly on their patients' genitals.
Once electricity then became available in private homes, women were able to administer their own cure for hysteria right in their own bedrooms. Portable vibrators appeared 10 years before vacuums or irons. Sears had a version with special attachments, so once a woman felt better, she could clean the house with the same machine.
Oh, girls just wanna have fun. The porn industry discovered the vibrator in the 1920s. Psychiatrists were horrified to see, right there on the screen, a medical device used for sexual pleasure. Vibrators were declared lascivious and immoral. Stores stopped selling them. As late as 2008, it was a crime to sell vibrators in Texas. It's still illegal to sell them in Alabama.
But by the second half of the 20th century, women's sexuality was no longer a big mystery. Female orgasm was identified, described, and encouraged for good mental and physical health.
R-E-S-P-E-C-T, respect. Vibrators became the best friend of many a girl and are at the center of a thriving sex toy industry. Around 1952, the medical profession dropped hysteria as a serious female disease. That just so happened to be the very same year Simone de Beauvoir published her manifesto, The Second Sex, which jump-started the women's liberation movement. Coincidence?
Well, feminism helped women and men understand how society constrained, misunderstood, and mistreated female bodies over the centuries. So maybe feminism was the medicine that cured hysteria.
A few years ago, the Guerrilla Girls gave our first ever commencement address at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in front of 4,000 cheering people in Millennium Park. Here are some rants from our manifesto.
The Guerrilla Girls Guide to Behaving Badly, which you have to do most of the time in the world as we know it. It's a guide for artists, it's a guide for art and culture workers, but it's also a guide for anyone trying to change or survive in an entrenched system.
Be a loser. The world of art doesn't have to be an Olympics where a few win and everyone else is forgotten. The art market and its hyper-competitive celebrity culture makes everyone but the stars feel like failures.
But there is another world out there that's not about raging egos, a world of artistic cooperation and collaboration. That's the one we joined, and the one some of you may join, and we all should join that world. Let's make trouble together.
Be crazy. Political art or activism that points to something and says, this is bad, is preaching to the choir. Instead, try to change people's minds and do it in some unforgettable way. Here's a trick we learned. Humor helps you fly under the radar. If you can get people who disagree with you to laugh at an issue, you have a hook into their brain, and once you're there, you have a much better chance to convert them.
Be anonymous. Sometimes you gotta speak out publicly, but sometimes it works even better to speak anonymously. Now, this has its disadvantages, like working your whole life without ever getting any credit. But it has lots of advantages, too. Our anonymity keeps the focus on the issues and away from our personalities. The mystery of who we might be draws attention to our cause. Plus, you won't believe what comes out of your mouth when you're wearing a gorilla mask.
Be an outsider. Even if you're working inside the system, we say act like an outsider. Seek out the understory, the subtext, the overlooked, and the downright unfair. Then expose it. Jam your culture, remake your institution.
Just do one thing. If it works, do another. If it doesn't, do another anyway. Don't be paralyzed if you can't do everything or if you can't get it right every time. Just keep chipping away. We promise you that bit by bit, your efforts will add up to something effective.
As you've seen tonight, we've done huge banners and billboards all over the world, but there are a lot of simple things that we've done that you can do too, if you're not doing it already. Stick flyers into books in museum stores, paste messages on the inside of toilet stalls, attach hang tags with political messages on merchandising stores, put up street art across from your workplace, slap stickers on fashion magazine covers.
You know, in just a few minutes, I'm sure everyone in this room could come up with a bunch of ideas that really could work.
Artists, don't make expensive art that only billion art collectors can afford. Curators, don't exhibit only the expensive art your trustees donate.
We need more cheap art that everyone can own, like books can, like zines, like music, like movies, like Guerrilla Girls posters.
Show museums tough love. It's unethical that wealthy art collectors who invest lots of money in art can become museum trustees, overseeing institutions that in turn validate their investments. It's a lousy way to write and preserve our history.
Demand ethical standards inside museums. No more conflicts of interest or insider trading. No more cookie-cutter collections of art that cost the most.
Convince art collectors their collections are inferior without work by women and people of color.
Don't let museums perpetuate the white male version of art and power with a few tokens thrown in. Make sure your favorite museum casts a wider net and collects the whole story of our culture.
Finally, whether you work in a museum or a classroom, don't teach an art history constructed by corrupt institutions. Do like we did, and like many of you are doing here, and write your own.
Good. Complain, complain, complain. But be a creative complainer. Be a professional complainer.
Don't assume people know what's missing from museums. Remind them how many modern and contemporary collections still contain less than 15% women. When we put up banners and billboards about the pathetically low number of women and people of color in art collections, or working in the film industry, people tell us how shocked they are that they didn't know this stuff before.
And use the F word, feminism. We think it's crazy that so many people who believe in the tenets of feminism are still afraid to call themselves feminists. Feminism, yes, do not. Feminism don't get the respect it deserves. Women's rights, civil rights, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender rights are the great human rights movements of our time.
Feminism is changing the world, revolutionizing human thought, and giving many women lives their great-grandmothers could never have imagined.
But there's still so much work to do. Violence against women is a huge international problem, from gang rape in India to kidnappings in Nigeria, to sexual slavery in ISIS, to the negligible punishment given out for domestic violence in the United States.
Then there's rampant sexism in our tech industry, not to mention Gamergate.
And what about the gender earning gap that the US Congress refuses over and over again to move against? Or the harassment that women and girls have to face every day at school, at work, and on the streets?
But despite all this bad news, women's resistant movements are exploding all over the world. The F word, feminism, is the F word for the future. Join us on the right side of history.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. We're going to have a reception. I know there's a reception at the museum, but also we can take a few questions, yes? Yeah. If anyone wants to stay and ask some questions, we'll try to answer them. And then we'll see you all at the museum.
Hello.
Hello.
Sorry. I am a feminist artist as well, and I was really enlightened with a lot of the critiques that you have of the art world and the art institution. And I find that even within a liberal arts institution, it's hard to figure out where to get that source of information. So I was wondering if you had any suggestions of where to turn to get that alternative of art history and where to really get to the meat of these issues as they've been played out, historically speaking.
Well, historians, one great thing about feminism, and it's really changed the study of history, it's changed the study of art, and many great, wonderful scholars and thinkers have been writing lots of books that have refound artists from the past, that discuss the theory behind why it's so hard to change discrimination, in all kinds of ways. So it would be really hard to go over all of them. But for everyone who's just trying to deal with these issues, you got to think outside the box. I mean, you got to find a way that makes sense to you to talk about these issues. And in a way, that's kind of what we try to do.
I just want to say that you have a lot of appeal and more people should go ape for you guys.
Thank you.
I just want to say I really support your work, and I'm an artist too. But we both were students of the School of Head-Ons, and we've heard you guys criticize the Gallery Tally project. Can you kind of talk about that?
We did. No, that was totally wrong. Don't trust what you read in a newspaper. There's like bizarre misquoting. We totally support the Gallery Tally project. We still do that. We always did that, and we think it's an absolutely brilliant idea to have artists do those posters. Great idea.
Other questions? People are being very shy. Masks.
It seems that you really brought up the point, the corruption in the art world happens within museums and even with small galleries. As an artist, I feel that I have to continually bring up a moral agenda, like telling me that a work's been sold, the collectors ask, oh, where is it? People lie about it. It seems that every artist sort of has a responsibility to the agenda to scare these jerks out of their holes. It's amazing the level of corruption on all levels. It's like a business that just hasn't, it's just disgusts me. You're really posing it's an agenda that we should all follow as artists, in a sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems, through your actions, I mean, you guys are really making a movement. Do you see less corruption in the future in the art world? I mean, through what you guys are doing, it seems like it's working.
Well, I think if enough people like you keep making work and keep asking questions, then maybe things will change from the bottom up. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, there's so many, just in Los Angeles alone, there's so many wonderful artist-run spaces. They're doing a lot of work. They're sort of leaving the system in a way. They're thinking outside of the box and doing their own, kind of, reinventing the paradigm for themselves. So I think in that sense, there's a lot of hope on the ground level.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi. There's a Gandhi quote, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's something like, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, and then they try to fight you, and then you win. And I'm curious if you feel like that's been the arc of what you've been doing, and if you feel like you're in any one phase of that right now as a group.
That's a great question. I love that quote. Maybe we can find out where it comes from. I think it's really great. What stage are we at?
I believe
let's
it's
see.
Gandhi.
Well, there's denial. There's anger. Oh no, that's the grief thing. Sorry.
What was the arc? I'm sorry, I didn't hear the whole arc.
Tell us the quote again.
Step 1.
Okay.
First they ignore you. Step 2, then they laugh at you. Step 3, then they try to fight you. And step 4, then you win. I'm curious
I think
if
it happens over and over, the whole cycle.
Well, it just, maybe this isn't a direct answer, but it made me think as you said that. The one place where I think we have won over some people, and our work means something to, a tiny group of people, but that makes a difference. But you know who it's really hard to win over? The New York art world. It's probably the worst art world of all the art worlds. I mean, everyone hates each other. Nobody, it's almost impossible to win, to win in the way you're talking about, to win by having your ideas get over. And I'm not talking about exhibiting your work. I'm talking, it's just so snarky. Everyone just hates everybody. Yes. I can say it if you can't get it.
If you would like to see how similar the situation is in the theater and the performing arts in the United States, how similar it is to this. The statistics and the 7% is practically the same for actors and directors and writers. But I will say, if you're interested in the subject, by a great woman playwright, American playwright named Sarah, she's written a wonderful play. She's a MacArthur Genius Award winner, and it's called In the Next Room, or The Vibrator Play. Let me encourage you. Most of the cast is here and the director. So if it's the first weekend in March, it's very funny, and it deals with the late 1890s when the vibrators were being developed. And I think you'll see things you've never seen on stage before.
Congratulations. Yeah. Go ahead.
I know a lot of my friends and I are interested in activism, especially surrounding the arts, and I'm sure y'all know better than anyone that it's hard to support yourself financially. And so I'm just wondering if you have any advice or how you've gotten funding for Guerrilla Girls, because unfortunately sometimes you need to make money in order to sustain yourself.
Well, we've actually never, I mean, everybody has day jobs, and so that, to make income, but as far as funding Guerrilla Girls activities, we've never gone after grants or gotten grants for the most part. But we do, so rather than getting sort of donated money, we actually sort of, sell a poster here or tour. So we've just kind of made that work. Other than, I'm not sure what other financial advice to give.
I mean, we, just to be honest about it, we make most of our money by speaking at institutions, schools, museums around the world. And we don't need a huge amount of money, because what we do, if we do a project in a city, we've done like election billboards in Minneapolis and street projects in Holland and stuff like that. They pay for a production of that. Our billboards in Hollywood, we had to pay for ourselves. We did them in collaboration with a bunch of women directors, the first one anyway, and we all just kicked in money and got the cheapest billboard in LA. You know, not on the Sunset Strip, of course. And so often, you know, we're kicking in money too. And lately, you know, it's really important for us to have our work in museums like this museum because it lets people come and look at it. And it's public, you know, it's there for the future. So we've been making an effort lately. We've done it all through our whole Guerrilla Girl life, but we've been making an effort lately to try to get our work into institutions, which is great for us to have it there, and also we do get paid for it.
I really appreciated what you said about using humor to win people over, and I guess sometimes I feel like there's an impulse to like pick the most difficult issue and go straight for the heart of it, and you guys do bring up some like really tough stuff, but I guess I think about like what if you want to do work on like sexual violence or something that's like super heavy? Like, I totally agree. So then how can you frame more like difficult and heavy topics with humor to try and get people on board?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are things it's pretty hard to use humor for, but we did do that violence and hate speech poster, and we've done some other posters actually that we've done posters about rape and things like that. I guess everyone has to find their own way. The most important thing that I would say is most political art, there's fantastic political art out there today. Everyone has the means to do it, everyone is doing it, and it's absolute pleasure and joy to see, whether it's, you know, serious in your face or, you know, twist issue around and present it in a way that can change people's minds, which is what we try to do. But I think the important thing is to try to find a way into an issue that hasn't been seen before. Most political art just points to something, and basically the headline could all be the same. This is bad. Not that it's still not creative, but you know, that's where it's coming from. And if you look at some of the things, you know, not everything we do works the same way, but if you look at some of the things that do work, if you look at, do women have to be naked to get into the Metropolitan Museum? Okay, what that really says is, the headline could have been, there aren't enough women artists at the Metropolitan Museum. And we probably wouldn't be here tonight, and you know, that would be that. So that's the perfect example. Just try to find something else. Use facts, use humor if you want, or don't, but just try to do it another way. And the other thing for all of you who are activists and artists, very important to test drive your work, because you get so involved in it and you think it really means something and it has everything in it and everyone will know. Just when you're got something done in this kind of, you know, political realm, take it to someone who hasn't seen it and you haven't explained anything to them about it, and just show it to them and say, could you just play back to me just in a couple of sentences what we're trying to say here? And you'll be surprised. Sometimes you find you nailed it, and other times you find zero. You know, so I recommend it.
Let's go over here and then.
I have a question about the divide between your early work and like the presentation tonight. It seems like the early work, like the posters and the masks, seem to be about like confrontation, where your presentation tonight was very well received by this group of people. And so I'm wondering like how you've noticed that change throughout like the Guerrilla Girls' careers, and if you miss kind of the aspect of confrontation that comes with like posters in the middle of the night, if you feel like, or if you feel the value of like community support and organization through this method is valuable too, if you miss the confrontation.
Well, our actual early posters, you know, would be up in New York for 5 minutes. I mean, no one really understands that because we have pictures of it. It looks like it was there. But actually, we put up a few, you know, like 50 posters, and that would be the end of it. So our work always had another life of us going around and showing it to people, sending it places, and distributing it. But if you mean just the in-your-face kind of very plain way it was done, that, in a way, was also economic, because at that time it was really hard. You had to order letters from a lettering place. You had to paste it all up into something. You had to print it up, which was a lot more expensive. You know, we have the means now to kind of do everything that we want. So we feel over time, we started very simply with what we knew, trying to make everyone in the art world responsible for what they were, for their part in discrimination. That was the basic message. And that kind of worked. And remember, we were also political activists, many of us in our own lives, and we were doing and still do work under our own names. I mean, activist work, not just artwork. And we had other interests, so we very quickly expanded to lots of other political interests. And we just kept trying to do it differently. We kept trying to do it deeper. I understand what you're saying, you know, but there were things we wanted to say that were longer, so we wrote books. We do these big street projects all over the world, some, you know, 40, 50 feet high, or an intervention at something like the Venice Biennale. I mean, that was pretty out there intervention. I don't know, you might be right, but I think we just work as artists and we just try one thing and try another. And we have so many possibilities now to just think it out. And our main thing now is the system. You know, our early work did diss the system and did take on the system, but right now we've kind of refined our thinking and we really are interested in how the world of artists is great, but the art world sucks, and more than ever. And that's become a real focus for us. But you could be right. Maybe it was better.
We have a whole batch of questions here. Why don't we take just a couple more and then we can move over to
Yeah.
the museum
Okay.
and see the exhibition? And let's see, there's one. Did Terry just, oh, there's one right there, and then I'll hand to you, okay?
I'm curious, like, how many people are currently in the group, and how do you allocate your roles? And did you ever have internal conflict, and did you have to negotiate between each other and stuff like that? How it works? The group.
Well, the group, at any one time, a lot of people have come and gone, and at any one time the group is pretty small. So we'll leave it at that in terms of numbers. There's always conflict, and, but that's, you know, there's always a lot of rigorous discussion and debate, so that just kind of comes with the territory. And as far as allocating work, it seems to allocate itself naturally.
I was just curious about how you guys feel about the documentary Misrepresentation, because I've heard a lot of mixed messages about it. Like, have you seen it?
I haven't seen it, have you?
Okay.
I haven't seen it, sorry.
No, sorry. We've heard from the filmmakers, but I haven't had a chance to see it.
Hi, I'm Sophie. Thank you so much for bringing your message here tonight to the Claremont Colleges. My question is, I completely recognize that this is a social movement about really bringing awareness to the lack of representation of women in color in higher art forms, really in museums, but I also am sure that you can acknowledge that women and people of color aren't encouraged in the same ways to pursue the arts. And I'm curious if you do any work like in schools or with young people, really encouraging these underrepresented groups to make art and produce art and find interest in that whole world that they're not represented in.
Well, we've done a lot of things, talks and workshops. We do workshops also where we kind of work with people who do their own kind of activist work. We help them do activist campaigns, and we've done that with kids a little. We've done it with middle school students in different cities, with high school students. But you know, we're just a bunch of artists, so we just work as artists, really. We don't have a plan. We love to connect with people. And our work itself encourages people to be creative and to be artists. But we're not the kind of organization to go out on a special trip with that message, although it's a great message and people should be encouraged to follow their passion.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And please join us over at the Pomona College Museum of Art to see the exhibition and to perhaps spend another moment or two with the Guerrilla Girls. Thank you.